I'm joined by the beautiful Valentina today in London. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, thank you, despite some technical issues, but we're good other than that.
Love technology, and it's so nice to see you. And especially, I mean, we go back a long while. We went to primary school together. Would you figure that one out? And you've had an impressive, very impressive career path. In fact, you studied at Boston University, then you led on to do even a degree in law. Tell us a bit more about that.
Oh, well, actually, that was just a little. So after I actually did a degree in international relations and journalism, and then I'd always sort of thought I would do a master's. And then after working for so many years, I thought, well, rather than going back and do a full master's, at that point I felt like I had a master's in life. I thought I would do a course at LSE. So it wasn't a full master's; it was just a course on international human rights law and practice. So it was specific to my work at the time, which was focused on international human rights law.
Fantastic. So, on the basis of that, I mean, it was quite hard to find a topic that would maybe interest people and also without going into too much depth into the technicalities of certain subjects. But I think one that clicked nicely also with the luxury side was sustainability. So how about we go into that as people are talking about it, it's all in the media, it's become a bit of a buzzword, and a lot of companies and principals have been utilizing the word sustainable or sustainability for their own good sometimes. So there's a negative and a positive side. So first of all, let's talk about the word sustainability. What is it? And give us some insights there.
Sure, great place to start. Well, first of all, it's not hard to get confused by it. I don't blame people really. There are a lot of fads that come and go. A lot of people use the word interchangeably depending on the sort of environment that they work in. You know, what is sustainability? Very genuinely, it's the capacity or the ability for both the biosphere, kind of the flora, to to coexist with human civilization, right? So more specifically, what that means is that any process or state or issue can be maintained at a certain level for a long period of time. So if we're talking about sustainability in the business world, it's about what are the practices and procedures we put in place now that allow people, society, the economy, and the environment to all work in harmony with each other and make sure that the resources we are using or making use of now are not depleted for future generations. It's a difficult one because it comes with it's a loaded term, and it comes with a lot of sort of negative connotations for a lot of people who go, oh, not again. We have to think about that, you know? And really, it should be something positive that we think about because we all stand to gain from making sure we embed good practices in terms of what we do for society and the environment into our professional and personal lives. So when it comes to development, just to kind of give you two quick applications. So what is sustainable development, for example, in a development space? So working with NGOs or charities or social enterprises. It's about development that meets the needs of both the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And when it comes to, for example, thinking about the environment, it's not that we necessarily have to do without the luxuries that, you know, we kind of have gotten used to and like to have in our lives, but rather being a bit more aware of the resource consumption and reducing unnecessary waste. So reducing waste wherever possible, but really that unnecessary waste that we've kind of just gotten so used to consuming and doing away with in ways that are not necessarily beneficial to the environment or our own society. So I'll stop there.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you for highlighting those 2 points. Very important. And people get confused by it. They think that sustainability equals just the ecological side of it. And actually, when we look at the new generation of consumers, which is the millennials, the Gen Zs, they are very much driven by the whole fact of sustainable products, and they are very attentive as to which brands are focusing and actually highlighting that in what they deliver and what they offer. So, I mean, I read an article today, and apparently 85% of the global luxury sales growth is driven by the millennials and the Gen Z. So, you know, we might think that it's just a trendy word, but in actual fact, it's not. It's definitely on the agenda there. And those brands that have been familiar with the old way of doing things perhaps need to wake up. And I think you've had more experience with helping brands and companies and NGOs focus on that. So do you want to give us some examples of where that's worked well for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks for that. I agree. It's you know, it's exciting, and to somebody who's been in this space for a while now, it is invigorating in a way, because you know, in the beginning, in the early days of sustainability, or you know, we used to be called, you know, tree huggers, and all sorts of sort of monikers were attributed to us to make us seem like idealists, and you know, like we were trying to achieve something completely unrealistic or completely idealistic. And in reality, it's not about that. It's really about looking at practical ways that everybody in every sector, whether it's industrials or financial services, or you know, the retail sector, can apply it. And there are ways that we can all apply this to our industries. So in terms of my experience, which is what you asked about, I have, over the last couple of years now, been working independently on a few different projects. And on the one hand, I've worked with women's empowerment organizations in Sierra Leone, Congo, and Cameroon, to see how we can empower women to report on certain activities and educate other women about these issues, so that they can not only lift up the women who are really struggling to live off of $1 a day, or sometimes less, believe it or not, but also to how they can stand to benefit from this conversation around sustainability. So, and the reason that's important is it's very hard for people who, not just in Africa, and I don't like to talk about these scenarios just in Africa, because there are poor people on our front doorstep here in London, in the US. We've seen right now with what's going on with coronavirus, how many people are really living off of one, you know, from paycheck to paycheck, and how quickly the scenarios can change for them. So it's really important that we all try to think about how we can build in sort of the future long-term thinking while helping people with the day-to-day short-term thinking. So a great example of a project that I worked on, and it's actually something that is still trying to get off the ground. So just to talk about something from its inception, right, is a project that I worked on with a colleague here in London, and she is a dog owner. And dogs are actually, after humans, obviously, are the largest consumers of meat. Given that dogs are carnivores, descendants from wolves, they have to have a largely protein-based diet. And by very nature, of course, that means they consume a lot of meat, whether it's cows or lamb or whatnot. It's a large amount. And that, by very nature, means that they are obviously contributing to the carbon emissions and whatnot of the whole meat industry, right? Everything from the production and the you know, how they get the meat, and then how it's transported and then brought to the stores, and the packaging around it. So there's a lot that can be done differently in the specifically dog food industry to be more sustainable, more ethical, and more eco-friendly. And so a project that I worked on, to be honest, it was not something I had thought about until this friend approached me to work on the project with her, because I'm not a dog owner. I love dogs, but I'm not a dog owner. I've only ever had horses and cats in my life. And so I started to think pragmatically about what could be done to improve this industry. And the more I learned from her, she's a vegetarian like myself. So typically, you know, we tend to be on the side of, you know, reducing meat consumption all around. for various reasons. But in this case, obviously, dogs being carnivores, they have to eat meat. So it's really not, this is quite controversial, because the vegans and the vegetarians, some will actually, have their dogs eat a vegetarian diet, but it's actually not good or healthy for them, right? And there's also some philosophical and other theories that people have. So I don't want to get into the sort of taboos of it, but let's just say they are carnivores, have to have this meat-based diet. And if we want to make that sector as ethical and sustainable as possible, we have to think about the full value chain, right? The full supply chain, from getting the cows, if it's beef, off the farm and how they're raised, and how they're fed, to then how they are unfortunately slaughtered, and then how they are transported from the abattoir to the meat processing facility, how that meat is processed, then how it is packaged. So whether it's ethical, sustainable packaging, to how it then gets transported from the processing unit to the stores where it's then sold, or if it's to purchased online. So we started to think about that whole process from start to finish, and it's really that whole supply chain that needs to be rethought and rejiggered, because there are a lot of complexities, obviously, with trying to produce a premium quality, because something that has almost all or only meat in it is going to be quite expensive, and therefore it's going to be a premium quality product compared to a lot of the other dog food companies out there that fill their product with either wheat or grains, or a lot of what we call nasties and things. And so, you then have to think about how you're going to market that product, because obviously most people don't want to pay a premium price. But then you get into the whole aspect of, well, if your dog is consuming mostly meat, which it should, you actually don't need to fill it that kibbles bowl filled, that you're used to filling your dog with, because you need to fill its belly.
Where they get addicted by it, so they eat more. I mean, all the low end foods are like that, and also for humans, if we'd like to compare that. I mean, it's very right what you're saying, and it applies all across the board, not just pets.
Exactly, precisely. And I mean, that is really, that's really the way, this kind of thinking, by the way, to step back from this individual project without getting too much into the nitty gritty, I wanted to explain how we think about a whole supply chain process when you're bringing that sustainability lens to something. But without getting too much into the nitty gritty of the details, the key to take away from this is, when you're looking at how people do things traditionally, which for decades, centuries, is giving dogs kind of bowls full of kibbles or dried food, and once in a while giving them a bit of a leg of lamb or a leg of beef or whatnot. You have to kind of help people rethink about how they feed their own dog, without obviously being patronizing. And people can feed their dogs whatever they want at the end of the day, as long as the dog's happy and healthy. But that's exactly the point. A lot of dogs are developing diabetes, skin issues, eczema, cancers, because the food industry, unfortunately, both human and dog food, is no longer taking into consideration. I'm going to get myself into trouble here with what I say about it, but they're not always taking into consideration that the things they fill the cans of dog food with are good for the dog. And yes, it may fill their bellies, but is it nutritious food? So actually, when you have something that is predominantly 98 or 99% meat, you don't need to give them as much, because it's really nutritious. So then you have to think about how to market it. Anyway, so that's kind of one of the projects I've worked on. And the key takeaway being that you have to think from start to finish how you reinvent the wheel sometimes, and how you then get people to rethink about, what does it mean to be ethical? What does it mean to be sustainable? Do we need to be, reinventing products from the start, or can we just change parts of the supply chain? And sometimes you do need to reinvent the wheel. Most times you don't. But either way, you need to look at it from multiple angles.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and quite a process, I would say. And that's something that we as individuals and companies don't have the time to realize it. But now, actually, in lockdown, it is good, because you're kind of evaluating where you're going with this. And I think a lot of people coming out of this will revalue the way that they buy their foods or their products. You know, it's all about going back to basics now. Everything around us that we're surrounded by, it's meaningless, really. But what counts is the things that are good for us and good for the environment and good in general. So I think sustainability in that sense is definitely going to be high on the agenda for many people and businesses, and an opportunity for businesses also to grab at and do things that are going to appeal to this new audience or consumer group that are interested. So yeah, it's brilliant. And in your opinion, then, what would you say are the major things that one could do without reinventing the wheel, but things that you could do personally or as a business owner to make it sustainable in your way?
Great question, because I think a lot of people really struggle with how to implement this idea of sustainability into their personal and professional lives on a day-to-day basis. Sort of what small, tangible steps can we take day by day to improve whatever it is we're doing or working on, and how we're living. And that's really the question right there. The idea is not to overwhelm people with a million facts and ways that they need to overnight change their lives or their jobs. It's about taking small but concerted and committed steps to improving whatever it is we're doing. So to answer your question, I think the first thing is to look at whether you're providing a product or service, what are the various steps along the way to providing that product or service that maybe don't quite meet the sort of ethical and sustainable criteria. In other words, if you're selling a product, and from the point at which that product is sort of sourced, produced, created, to the point that it is sold, are there steps along that process that either don't include ethical packaging, so meaning packaging that isn't recyclable or isn't compostable, or can't be reused in practical ways? Are there ways in which it's sold that are not eco-friendly either? So are you transporting those goods and products across miles and thousands of miles? So to bring it back to this dog food company, one of the things that to give you an example, one of the things that we looked at was, where are the competitors to our product? So if the product we're developing is a premium quality product of 98% meat, which is good for dogs, are there other companies out there already doing this before we go and create one? Because if so, great, let's just promote that one. Yeah. Turned out the only other competitors doing this either didn't have a premium quality product at the end of the day. They said they did, but it really wasn't that much meat in it. It was filled with a lot of other things that weren't so good. Or they came from thousands of miles away. So there was a great product similar to what we wanted to create all the way in New Zealand. So yeah. Transporting it all the way from New Zealand to the UK on a regular basis, because there are a lot of UK people who have, people in the UK who have dogs. So creating a market of that type of product would have not been sustainable either, because you're talking about carbon emissions and, the air transport that it takes. And so you have to look at the various parts in the supply chain or production that might not be eco-friendly or ethical or socially friendly, right? Also about the people. So are there people in the supply chain that are not getting paid a fair wage, right? Are they being exploited in some way? And a lot of people get sort of depressed and down when we mention the word modern slavery, because of course nobody wants to think that in this day and age, still today, we have such a thing as modern slavery. But reality is human trafficking, whether it's the fact that we're just more transparent about the numbers now, or and we're more aware of it or not, but they say that human trafficking and modern slavery is a bigger issue today than it ever was. Yeah. So, we do have to be really realistic and just pragmatic about the fact that these things exist. Let's not get all depressed about it. Let's try and find pragmatic ways to address it and eliminate those practices as best as possible.
Fantastic. So that's something that you're focused on now quite heavily and in your work domain. And if anyone has any questions or would like to reach out to you, is that something that's available to them? And how do they do that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'd be flattered and honored to work. I'm always a glutton for punishment. I love these types of passion projects. So yes, I mean, if anybody wanted to just ask questions or for advice, or even just to sort of sound check a few of their own ideas, or even to explore a potential career in this space, I'm always encouraging people to kind of especially people who are disillusioned with maybe their own career path and what they're currently working on to find alternative ways to fulfill their own professional goals. So yeah, if you wanted to reach me, I'm always available on pretty much every platform except for TikTok. So Facebook, Instagram, Skype, I'm not so good at apparently. We found out today, but my email, probably the best email is vbarbacci@gmail.com. And we can always send that out in a note following this video. But I'm usually best on social media or email or WhatsApp eventually.
Great. And so if anyone wanted to take away like 3 things from this or from your experience, what are the things you would suggest, especially now here in lockdown mode and the looming deconfinement coming up?
Great question. Okay, well, few takeaways just to finish on a positive note is that first of all, there are visible signs, and it's really encouraging for those of us who have been working in this space for a while. There are visible signs that the needle is moving on sustainability, and it's not just a really steep uphill battle anymore. Actually, we've seen all sorts of investors now looking at this more seriously and making big commitments towards investing in sustainable practices and sustainable businesses. I mean, the fact that a philanthropy/social impact members club opened up in this heart of Mayfair last year is probably a good indication that people are really not only finding this trendy and the new buzzword, it's actually they're really investing in this space and helping both NGOs and charities, but almost more importantly, in my view, social enterprises get off the ground. Meaning we're not just looking at sustainability as a nice to have kind of checkbox exercise anymore. A lot of people are now thinking, oh, we can actually make a profit off of a business that does good and does well. Wow, that's interesting. Let me look into that more. So that's one really great takeaway, I think, personally. And then secondly, that I think people are starting to wake up specifically now with, coronavirus unfortunately shaking up a lot of people's livelihoods. I think we're realizing that this short-term thinking that we have been sort of stuck in for various reasons for the last several decades, if not centuries, is not really benefiting us. And in fact, is not benefiting the majority of people on this planet. And we really need to also not just think about people, we need to think about the flora and the fauna around us. And that short-term thinking is not going to get us anywhere. So, and by short-term thinking, I mean thinking only of that shareholder value that we provide, right, in profit, generating profits. The more we think about the long term, the better we do also in the short term. And that doesn't sound intuitive to most people, but we're slowly waking up to this realization that if we invest now in the short term in good practices that do well for both the environment and people and the economy, then we will be much better off, not only ourselves, but future generations in the long term. So I think that's exciting to see that needle move of somebody who, was dubbed a tree hugger in her early days and now is being called on by companies and businesses to apply this more concertedly within the professional setting. I think that's really encouraging.
Well done. It's amazing and to see this flourishing, and I'm wishing you all the best in all your endeavors, and I'm sure lots of people are going to need your services, and now's the time to get you, because after lockdown's over, you'll be so busy anyway.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, yeah, for me, it's I just really hope that more people, I mean, I came to this, I had sort of my life imploded in 2014, and I was working in the private sector in financial services research and kind of taking a detour from my do good charity work, and gotten sucked into it, and my life imploded before I was able to kind of take a step back and go, wait, this was never my plan. My plan was always to get back into something that did well for society, but applying that business acumen to it. And I really encourage others to seek out ways to do that in their own lives, because I think, when you're down and depressed, it's usually because we're not fulfilling a personal, professional, or physical aspect in our life, and all three are really important. And we have to nurture all three of those at different points in our lives, and ideally all at once. So happy to be a sounding board if anybody is feeling like they want a different way out here.
What a lovely way to wrap this conversation up. I'm so grateful for all your time and your insights. Amazing. And like we said, we'll put the little link there at the bottom of the bio so people can connect with you. And hopefully we'll do a recap in the future to see how things are going with you. And
yeah.
And take care now, because we're going through a hard time, but you seem like you're positive and motivated. So keep it
always,
up.
Always. Thanks so much, Natalia. I really appreciate this. Looking forward to another one.
Thank you so
Take care.
All right, everyone. This was another episode of Luxury with Natalia. Look forward to seeing you soon for more episodes. And of course, like and subscribe as much as you can. Take care, everyone. Bye.